So welcome, Bruno Fulda.
Hi, Nan. Thank you for those words. I'm very honored uh, to be today on your podcast.
Well, we're glad to have you. Let's talk a little bit about the Academy and your involvement in the Academy of Housing and Communities. You're a fellow that was selected. Talk a little bit about your experience with the Academy.
Well, actually, in my last posting, I was the French attaché at the embassy in DC for transportation, energy, and sustainable development, which includes urban development. So I was actually very happy to accidentally meet the chairman of the academy, Kent Watkins, and we worked very well together. He helping me discover the HUD, which was quite useful in my functions. And actually, when we did organize this event that you just mentioned, thank you for that, Kent was of great help. And I was able to manage to organize some meetings for the academy in Paris, as well as during the COP21. So it was really a great chance in my career to meet the academy, and I went to as many meetings as I could, since it was always an occasion to learn a lot.
It sounds like a good marriage. Now, Bruno, you're a pilot and you've been an advisor to French transport ministers and chief economist and planner of an airline. Where did that passion for aviation begin?
Well, I'm going to be a bit intimate, and probably age permits that. But when I think about my passion for aviation, I see a few influences. And the first one is what happened in Europe in the 40s, in the last century, because the Shoah brought to my spirit. Of course, I'm born in the 60s, and this was already history, but very, very close history and close to my family. So this probably resulted in some kind of distrust, or at least prudence towards the world. And also, part of my family was very much implied in the resistance. Well, actually, as Jews, we had no much choice. And that taught me that you have to confront whatever comes to you. So hence, aviation was probably both, it's a fantastic liberty to move, and you find the same liberty in diving, maybe in dancing in some ways, but also it was the capacity to keep my physical freedom, and if I dare say, to escape the need being.
Do you have any other passion?
Well, since you make me relate to my early years, being a Boy Scout was a great moment of learning, uh, being challenged by the nature, which I still love, being challenged by the group, learning leadership also at that time, and learning to be curious and push any door, which actually I did in Beijing one very day about 15 years ago. And I met a young Chinese sculptor. And since I always have been very interested in art, I could say I started a collection of the works of Zhen Zhe, but this is more personal.
Well, it sounds very interesting. So tell me about being appointed permanent secretary of the French National Council for Civil Aviation.
I actually joined the civil service with the idea of serving my country or serving the people. Very quickly, it meant serving the French people and more globally, serving the people around me in the world. I wanted to contribute to a better world. What is better? A better mankind? That's a bit complicated to define. But I was for a while in charge within the French government. I was under Secretary for Air Transportation, and as such, I tried to do the best to help the development of the airline industry. This is a very interesting topic these days, now that we are going through the crisis of the COVID, and that model of traveling all around the world is pretty much questioned.
That's very true. When you fly, do you ever fly like to another country on your own, or since you are a pilot, or do you always just take regular airline transportation?
When I do fly away, I mean far away, I take commercial airlines. But whenever I have to go to places in Europe for my work, if I can, I take the small planes of my administration. And let's put that I'm having pretty much a white collar job, but by maintaining this technical skill of being an IFA pilot, which is rather complicated when you do not practice every day, I am very proud of having this skill.
So, with the COVID restriction on transportation, how, that is that affecting how you're able to go practically anywhere outside of Europe?
Of course it does, but I should say that we had 2 months of confinement in France, and those are probably the times where I was the most connected with friends and colleagues all over the world, because I spent a lot of time in Zoom or team meetings and on the phone.
Thank goodness for Zoom, right?
Yeah,
It gives us that connection that otherwise you'd be stranded in France and everybody else would be stranded in their own country. But you're able to still communicate quite well at this
I
point.
do. Yes, yes, we definitely do. And this will change the way people work all around the world. I think in a good way, of course, sociologists will write books about it, and there will be a lot of seminaries. But I think we are at the eve of some changes. And it's interesting because what does that bring to us? It brings, how do you say that in English? Immediacy. It gives you the immediate link with the people you want to talk to. Because a few hundred centuries ago, people were still communicating. It took 6 months to write to your king in Europe and get instructions back in South America or in China.
I'm curious about something. With all your travel to all these various continents, countries, there's a different culture of accepted behavior in business. How does that come through on Zoom versus being there in person?
Pretty interesting question. Actually, behaviors do translate into Zoom meetings. Uh, when you have a meeting with 40 people, it does demand a lot of discipline. And some people are more able of it than others. In some countries, the talk is very, very much according to the hierarchy, and you don't have a Zoom meeting the same way with Italian people and with Japanese, of course.
That's specifically what I was thinking about, that you have some protocol in dealing with particularly some of the Asian countries, I would think. That how does that translate over Zoom?
Well, actually, I was mostly in, let's say, technical meeting or exchanging thoughts. So when you start just going around the table, then people have to talk. And there is no way they can look at their boss and hope for a nod or a frown. But there is something that you do use on Zoom a lot, which is the chat, and you can have private chat, and you can exchange a lot on the verge of the meeting as well.
That's interesting. I never thought about how private chat would work into that, but yes, I can see it.
with
Now you
with
you
the
seem
nuance, with the nuance that you have to be very cautious to whom you're writing, and there could be a lot of mistakes.
and just be sure you're sending the chat to the right person. You seem to also have a passion for saving the environment. Where did you start in this field, and how did you arrive at this spot in your career?
Well, who would not want to save the environment today? Well, more seriously, I always had two obsessions or two main moving forces. The first one has always been understanding the world around me, be it thermodynamics, bones reparation, or the miracle of the magical properties of the blood, be it of a horse, of myself, etc. Or let's say understanding relationship between people. So I'm interested about everything. And the second one, and maybe that comes from the war that my parents went through, was the urge to avoid waste in every field, be it energy, food, land waste. I don't know if American can understand that, but in my family, we did save the aluminum paper on chocolate um, bars, which is useless. And in my grandfather's study, there was a little box with little bits, it was written on it, little bits of everything which cannot be used, but he kept them. So I'm very much against waste in general. And but also, maybe that's funny. I'm by training a mathematician, and the beauty of math is having the most compact reasoning, the most compact demonstration. That's the most elegant. So the shortest you make it, the best it is. If we're talking about avoiding waste, something that is very important to me is also avoiding the waste of talent. And here we come to more society, and my aim, or yeah, I would like to reunite society. I believe everyone bears or creates a quantity of, let's say, energy. And if you take the most powerful generators, the individuals that are full of energy, either you can plug them to knowledge, to social codes, to Ivy League schools, and then they become a great assets for the nation and for themselves. Or if we're talking about poor people, people in bad environments, you do not do everything to help them develop, to help them blossom. And then you bury them in poverty, in inefficient school system. And actually, this energy still exists, so you do create a bomb that will not help the peaceful development of the world. So when I'm talking about waste, I'm also addressing this issue, which is pretty important for me.
And that issue is fighting racism and social segregation.
Well, as I said, um, helping people to develop whatever their environment is important. Um, actually, it's very unfair that just based on the place you were born, and not even mentioning the color of your skin, society does not offer you the same chances. It does not offer you an equal race towards happiness, whatever definition you put in that word, of course. Um, we consider as normal that medicine helps to cure diseases, to correct genetical defaults. Social, look, well, one, two, three, society, whatever you pronounce it, la société, the society should as well aim at offering equal chances um, which also brings to a limitation of frustration and helps to social peace.
And it seems like that ties in with the your whole concept of making cities sustainable. So tell me a little bit about that interest.
Again, we're talking about fairness. What is sustainability? We know that there are the three pillars of ecology. Uh, One of them is what we call in French durability, which in English is sustainability, which is ensuring that in the long run we do not waste, and also that it brings a fair economical development. So being a transportation engineer, but having digged into all the fields of my ministry, including habitat, housing, and urbanism, I felt only natural to be interested in sustainability in cities.
So how have you played that out in, say, Paris?
Are you talking about Paris as a city or
Yes.
the Paris COP conference, which was actually a great achievement already 5 years ago? In 2015, the COP21 was really something, and it was a big success due mostly to the personal commitment of President Xi of China and President Obama. And it was a time that everybody was on a little cloud thinking that yes, environment had won and that we would build a better world. Of course, time has proven that nothing is ever won, and we still have a long way to go. But that allowed me to work with a lot of very passionate actors in the US. And I'm still very optimistic about the capability of this world, and specifically of the United States of America, to work in the good direction on this. And we see some positive hints from local government, states and cities in the US.
Well, I'm glad you're still feeling positive about it.
Yeah.
You know, we worry about things like what's happening in the Arctic. You know, we worry about the types of things and kind of ties into what you've been talking about. How do you feel ecology and energy and transportation, sustainable development, and even the sea, where we've got the fish and the polar bears and things that are in danger? How can this be coordinated on an international basis?
It's interesting that you mentioned the sea, because back to the US government, um, I have met a lot of very serious people, and they are still now in leadership position in the administration. People in this at the CIA, people at the Pentagon, they do know about climate change. They know it does bring political unrest around the planet. They know that the rise of the sea has a direct effect on the big American ports and the big military ports. So they know it has to be addressed. And I still hope that the US will come back shortly to some kind of, to the UN in short, and to the UN negotiations. But to answer more specifically your questions with my hopes, I'm looking forward in the near future, because the planet is shrinking. It's smaller and smaller. I mean, we do travel. There are a lot of cross influences, soft power, cultural influences. We cannot, I mean, we will end up with some kind of global government, um, something which will come out of the UN in a better way. Pretty complicated to do because we will still have people around wanting to be by themselves, but we will not avoid having more and more coordination on the global scale.
And you feel that the UN is the vehicle to do that, the coordination on an international basis?
Well, on technical fields, meteorology, I mean, weather forecast and medicine, even if the recent crisis showed a lot of tension in the WHO, in immediate response to catastrophes, I had the honor and great interest in working with the World Food Program based in Rome. And those guys, they are UN civil servants, but they are totally dedicated to their task. And in the snapshot, in the snap, they being called on a Friday, they take their backpack and go at the end of the world to help the populations. So yes, I think there is a lot of good in the UN system. There is a lot to be corrected. I'm not sure this will be the solution, but we do have now a lot of experience with that.
How did your work in the Mediterranean tie into these areas?
When I was Undersecretary for International Affairs of my huge technical ministry, you mentioned biodiversity, energy, transportation, urban development, climate. An important project that France and Egypt were bearing was developing a union of the Mediterranean with the aim of helping the sovereign countries to develop. And it's the interest of everyone that the poorest country in the world have an economic development that brings them to better standards for obvious reasons. And that union for the Mediterranean was thought as a union of projects, not a political thing. And this seemed pretty much wise because we did work on projects in environment, transport, water, energy, as well as social relationship or business environment, and of course, education. And many of those topics were in my portfolio. I mentioned the first ones. So the French government asked me to go there and start that small international organization. It still exists now, 10 years later. It works closely with the European Union, and it has still a long way to go to be as efficient as we dreamt it to be. Probably it needs some financial means, because for the time being, it is mostly a political tool that targets projects and that tells this project of a railroad or this project of a new energy factory, renewable energy factory, is of political importance. And that is already some success.
Well, it sounds like the first step is the most important. So I know you're going to get where you need to be. And all of the things that you have done, what would you consider your biggest success story so far?
On a personal viewpoint, the most enlightening and nourishing experience was when I was working with the World Food Program. Because I traveled the world to very, very poor countries. And when I came back home and my kids did ask for a new tool, a new video toy, etc., having been in contact with people in Malawi or India or Western Africa helped to really relativize a lot. But talking about achievement, I'm happy to have been part of that little team that started the Union for the Mediterranean. And funnily enough, I would like to mention a tiny thing that I did when I was a young advisor to the French Minister of Transportation. I Unfortunately, we did experience two heavy aircraft accidents, and I did the liaison with the families of the victims. And I noticed that very rarely in an airline accident, the families are, I mean, the passenger is responsible for anything that may happen in some kind of terrorism. But usually there is a flow either in the aircraft, in the air traffic control, in the aircraft itself. And I had been confronted to very, very difficult personal situation. And I did convince my minister to change the law, to propose a change of the law, which was voted by the parliament, that allowed some immediate financial relief for the victims. This is a small step, but this was probably my first significant change to legislation or to helping the people around me. And that's something I still keep in mind. There is another achievement I'm pretty proud of, and this is all but professional, and those are my three kids, which have absolutely not followed my path, and they are serving the community in some different ways. I do hope that they do share my vision of a better world.
I can't imagine that they won't. Now, you work all over the world. What has the effect of COVID been on your work other than not being able to get from one place to another easily?
It's pretty interesting that, well, to see first the different ways of reaction of governments. And this, by the way, shows us that we do need strong governments. We do need regulation. Even in the US, even in the most conservative, more business-oriented part of your society, people recognize that there should be some action by the government. We had in France very interesting debates about what's the role of the political branch, what's the role of the technical branch, what is the role of experts. How do you cope with experts not having solutions when you're in charge, when you're the leader? So first, COVID brought a lot of philosophical debates, which on a personal basis are very interesting. Second, it is pretty fascinating to see that uh, this disease, which killed less than a portion of a percent of the world population, um, succeeded in blocking the world economy for a few months, almost everywhere. Everything was put at a stop. And when you think to some natural catastrophes, which in a few moments kill 300,000 people, when you have a big tsunami, that helps you put things in regard, in correspondence. And finally, the main lesson that I take out of that is that maybe all over the world, including in the most business, money-oriented part, human life is taken into account. So this is my positive view of it. Um, then, of course, it brings a lot of questions about being autonomous, having enough masks made at home, where do we fabricate our drugs, etc. So this will bring a lot of reflections about the globalization. I do not think it will change in the long run. And I think again about the way government reacted. It's very interesting that In Canada, in the US, the government gave a lot of money to economical actors. Um, when you read the memories of George Bush, who went through the banking crisis, he changed his liberal mind um, towards, maybe liberal is not the, the word you would use, but his mind to state interventionism to help the economy not to collapse. And the French government guaranteed for a few months a huge part, 85% of the salaries of the people who were not able to work. That there will be a before and an after all over the world. That's very interesting.
Well, it will be interesting to see if there really is an after as such, or whether it's a cycle up and down. You know, that part is really an unknown, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. We'll see what happens. Um, I'm not sure that people really ever learn from other people's experience, but I'm hopeful that they could. And that's why it's pretty interesting. It's important to know history, especially history of economics, but know it, think about it, and try to understand and explain it. Also, I have been an economist for 5 years in a large company, and I learned that the community of economists, they just want to hear to do mistakes in the same direction altogether. And it was one of the big lessons. I took two lessons out of that moment. First, nobody knows what's going to happen after 5 years. By saying 5 years, I'm pretty optimistic. Of course, after 1 year, you do not know, but you have some good probabilities. The second one is that even if you don't know where you're going, it's very important to draw a path, to make a plan. And even when your plan is printed and distributed within the factory, within the company, it is already obsolete. As a pilot who has to go through a certain path to land safely at a certain speed on a runway, when you have a red line, which is your plan, you know from which margin you're away, in which direction you're away from your plan, and you have a common reference. That's probably one of the main things I've learned. You need to have common references.
That's a good analogy. The book that you co-published talks about climate and capitalism. What's the relationship that you see there?
So is there a relationship? You mentioned that the ice caps are melting, so there will be new routes for ships from Shanghai to Boston. They will be cheaper. That will change the economy of the Suez Canal. Um, I've already expressed my views about the need for strong states, and I believe that regulated capitalism has, in a way, proven to offer the best level of freedom to men and women. I did happen to live in the Soviet Union in the 80s. It was a fascinating experience. By the way, when I worked in China as a young engineer, I discovered a lot of red tape, and I thought it was the Chinese communist system because I had seen that in the Soviet Union too. But then I came back to the French administration, and then I worked with a big administration called the Boeing Company. And believe me, the red tape is everywhere. Um, so I believe there should be efficient bodies, regulatory bodies, let's call them the state, to avoid exaggeration of wild capitalism, to avoid brutality from the powerful. There should be rules. There should be also taxes because the government needs money for a lot of things. There should be also shared principles, and that's what we call the constitution. We all have a constitution, which are supposed to be the basic principle that everybody agrees on and that every governing body or leader should know. Climate and capitalism. One of the regulatory tools of the climate issue is very easily a price on carbon. There is no doubt about the man-led global warming. So we have to reduce our emissions, we know all this. We will not avoid the global warming and probably more than 2 degrees by the end of the century. Oh, by the way, I do not think that the planet is threatened. I think the planet will survive. Maybe our civilization is a bit threatened, but I very much believe in the resilience of mankind. Actually, the social democracy that we see in Europe, the values that we have coming from the old Christo-Judean history, we believe a lot in human life. So we're trying to avoid the loss of lives. And that's the way in which we want to reduce global warming and fight its effects, attenuate the price that mankind will pay. So I was mentioning the price on carbon. That's a very simple answer. Some governments do it already, and you might be surprised to know that some companies also do it. They do it internally. They are anticipating regulations, and in their decision, in their analysis for large investment, they do put an internal price on carbon. This will shift the equilibrium, this will shift the balance, the today's balances in a lot of fields. As we see today in the automotive industry, you know that Chrysler and GMC had plans to go to electrical cars long time ago, and then they just killed those plans. They had started having electrical cars, they lent it to customers. Those customers were so happy, so thrilled with the cars, they wanted to keep it. But then the automakers say, no, we stopped the experiment and we won't put them on the market again, because they had so huge investment in the thermal car that they could not afford it. They decided not to go that way. I had a very interesting conversation with the president of Iceland a few years ago in Houston. And that exact same story happened with Mercedes. And Iceland is an island. Islands are the best experimental field for electrical cars. We should do that in UK, in Corsica, everywhere where you have small lengths of driving every day. And Mercedes as well lent electrical cars to Iceland and then decided to stop. So what happens? Then a new actor comes, and Tesla is just turning the tables away and say, okay, guys, you're not able to do it, I'm going to do it. So that's an example of how capitalism will be changed by climate change. And that example we see in the automotive industry, we see it also in the field of renewable energies. Let's just think about solar panels and who is doing today solar panels, who is doing today batteries for cars. You may remember that before we domesticated electricity, we used a lot of candles. So if you were in the 19th century, the happy owner of a candle factory, and you see that people are developing electricity everywhere, what would you do? Will you decide that you're a provider of light or that you're a provider of candles? In the second option, you won't last very long. So that's the way some companies reinvent themselves. And that's pretty interesting. Actually, capitalism has changed a lot. We have seen, well, wild capitalism and lumpenproletariat in the 19th century that came to mildly um, mixed capitalism and the development of middle classes in the 20th century. But there was already a regulation. Remember the Bell Company and the Baby Bell. Um, so that model of the middle class, everyone having a car, um, inspires a lot the new world, India, China. Why shouldn't everyone be happy in their own way? So um, for the time being, climate, the climate issues has a great influence on all this. And again, we come back to the role of governments or maybe NGOs. I've seen in the US a lot of action by private actors, non-profit actors. Uh, so that's a very different model from what we see in Europe. Some of them are very powerful, some of them are very efficient. I'm a bit concerned by the fact that a small group of actors could be able to take over an NGO and turn down its aims. But that's another story. Um, but back to economic theories, the market cannot everything by itself. Actually, reality is very far away from the perfect market that we learn at school. And there is no perfect circulation of information. I was really struck by the fact, for example, that population, that the federal government wanted to help in DC in the field of habitat. They were offering, there is a very interesting program by the HUD about insulation grants. Let's make your house less energy effective. And people, poor, uneducated population, didn't want to hear from it because they had no trust in the government. They had no trust in the public representation. They had not enough education. That raises a lot of questions about capitalism, climate change, and politics.
Well, what do you think are the biggest challenges for political leaders today?
What do you think? Gosh, um, it's difficult when you're in power not to forget the ideals that you had when you were aiming for power. Let's assume that you did that in good faith for the good of your fellow citizens. And you are taken by the machine. You are taken by the logics, the inner logics of governments, and you are ending up doing the best for your nation, for your country, or for the administration. But is it the best for the people themselves? If you compare that with family, when you have kids, you want the best for them, and you're trying to educate them in the best way for them. And sometimes you are doing the best for the group, for the family itself, but not for each individual. By the way, that's a very interesting difference. You were talking about cultural differences earlier. It's a very interesting difference between the West and the East, the way the individual and the group see each other. But to come back to your question about the leaders, what do they need? What are the challenges? The challenges are pretty the same throughout the ages. They should not be challenged by private sector, private corporation that become too huge to be regulated. And of course, today's Rockefellers and Gettys are the GAFAs in the West, but also BATX in China. There are huge corporations, and those need regulation. There are a lot of technical issues, technical and ethical issues that come with new technologies. There are big challenges, big data, artificial intelligence. I just mentioned the huge conglomerates, but those challenges are the same throughout the ages, as I said, with different forms. I think that the main challenge a state, a leader meets is still fighting poverty, inequality, and there are three main ways to fight that, which are education, education, and education. I think that leaders today, they need to, well, a very simple recipe: listen, examine the cases, decide, then explain the decision, and repeat. Easier said than done, I suppose.
Well, what do you really view as the biggest problem for society now and in the future?
Aren't we all looking for happiness? Um, I have the profound belief that the soul of man remains the same throughout times. I mean, let's be under the Roman Empire in 12th century China, or in some Inca cities, or today in Alabama, there will be the same human patience that you will find in Seneca, in Shakespeare, or in Tolstoy. And some people want to be the rulers of others. Some just want to be happy in their own families. So can we dream of a world where there will be equality? We have grown out of competition. I mean, this is the law of nature, right? And maybe a totally equalitarian society seems but a mere utopia, but we should work towards that utopia. And utopia is something that maybe we can build. So yeah, sharing. There is enough food. There is enough art. There is enough food for the mind for everybody, and I think we should share that.
That's an interesting concept. You know, when I'm thinking through some of the things that you've said, I think of the large corporations that you talked about and the bureaucracy of those corporations being very similar to the bureaucracy of the government and the larger governments. And yet we have the utopia concept, which of course is different for every person. How does that track with competition that we've had in the past? And they're all things that are so interesting to listen to you talk about, because you're looking at things from a very global perspective. And I'm not sure we always look at things that way. Our leaders necessarily always look at things from a global perspective. And yet, how can you not? What do you think about that?
I think that intelligence is making bridges between different fields. What makes a genius? What makes an inventor of new medicine? What makes an artist? Why am I interested in art? Because it does stimulate my mind. It does tells me a story. when I'm listening to a sinfonia, I see a movie. When I'm looking at a painting, I am being told a story. When I see my statues um, from that sculpture, and I have in my office only here 3 or 4 of them, um, everyone tells me a story. And I think that from the cave age to William Defoe to Mark Twain to Hollywood to Netflix, we love being told stories. But why? Because that makes us travel. And our leaders, they should be enlightened men and women. They should travel. They should confront ideas, models with other leaders. I do think competition is good. It is stimulating and it has to be rewarded in some way. Uh, but building bridges is far more efficient globally than building walls. Um, and yeah, just compare yourself to others, learn languages, read, travel, or travel on the internet because you have so much to discover on the internet. I mean, that's enlightening and at the same time modest work of yours. I mean, recording a podcast twice a week. That is sharing experiment, and I cannot thank you enough for doing that, by the way. Hoping that not mine, but all the others podcasts that you have recorded will be listened to and shared.
Well, let me close with one final question, and that is, what advice do you have for the younger generation? You have 3 children, so I know you've experienced the younger generation. What advice do you have?
Well, despite all the optimism I may have described, I'm also related to some kind of cynical school. And I was struck by that quote, it's probably Macbeth, life is but a walking shadow, it's full of sound and fury and signifies nothing. Uh, but life is also a fantastic and constant discovery. And that's really a motto, that's uh, a motor to advance. And you also can discover a lot of your own personal capabilities that you do not suspect. So maybe 3 points. The first one would be never stop questioning. Never stop being curious about life, about society, about yourself, by the way, about others. Um, the second one, I love this phrase, which Gandhi has not said, by the way, supposedly, be the change you want to be. It's amazing how people do not know it, but if you want something, you can achieve it. If you want to change the society, in many cases, you can do it. Um, when I came to the US, totally by chance, I discovered Upton Sinclair. I read Oil. And then I got interested in that guy, and that writer actually spread a lot of ideas because he was interested in spreading those ideas, and he spread ideas about inequality in many fields of capitalism. So daring is living, living is daring. A limited amount of people can change the world. I recently read a very, very short piece by Austrian author called, Stefan Zweig, who wrote about the journey of Lenin on April 9th, 1917, from Switzerland to Russia, to St. Petersburg. And funnily enough, ironically, the Germans allowed Lenin to go through the country with 32 other Soviets. hoping that he will destroy um, Russia, which he did. He destroyed all Russia, but he was able to rebuild a new Russia. So the fact that very limited people can change the world should be kept in mind. Be curious, dare, be the change you want to be, and know history, learn, read. I think that should be the main message in a nutshell.
Well, thank you so much, Bruno. We really appreciate the time that you've given this and all your thoughts. You're fascinating to talk with. I really have enjoyed our session, and I look forward to maybe meeting you someday and talking in person.
Thanks a lot, Nan, because that was pretty challenging, and you helped me actually sort my thoughts. Now I will test this on my kids, and I'm sure they will not be as benevolent as you are. And I certainly hope to meet you either in the US or in Paris, where you're always welcome.
Sounds
Thanks
good.
again for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Bruno.
Thanks from my side. Bye bye.
If you enjoyed this video, please join Kent and me, and please subscribe free to this channel. Share it with your friends and click on the thumbs up icon to like us.